Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody, and happy end to 2023 and happy new year and 2024. I have a topic that I can't tell if it's going to be long or short. I like this topic because it's one of the things that I enjoy doing, which is cooking an enormous amount of information and ideas and insights. And I'll sit there and compulsively think about it and think about it until it renders down to a couple simple concepts that it's like, wow, that's really effective. And it doesn't continue to be endlessly complicated for people. And those are the sorts of things that often can be helpful in therapy and for me and for anybody. And so I've talked about things adjacent to this, for example, a sense of purpose, an alignment with your true self, and people who get confused about like, why do I procrastinate? And so often they procrastinate not because they have a problem with procrastination, but because they've had so many expectations and false senses of identity overlaid on them. They don't even remember what it's like to be doing something that's in alignment with who they are, where their true talents and skills are really being leveraged, so that they can feel happy and joyful and feel motivated to push things forward for them. And so this is sort of adjacent to that. When people come into therapy, they're trying to make decisions about really important things, or they're trying to make decisions about things that maybe are just medium important, and maybe they feel really anxious about it. And any good therapist is often going to be very frustrating, because it's going to appear that we dodge these questions. So especially in psychodynamic, a therapist is always going to turn it back on the client. And I've heard many clients complain about like, oh, as soon as I ask the therapist a question, all they do is turn around and ask me a question. It could be something like, well, you know, what do you think? Is my husband like mildly abusive or toxic or not? And the therapist will say, well, how do you feel about it? Does it feel toxic to you? And that can be very frustrating, because sometimes people are just like, you're the expert, like I'm paying you a lot of money and I know that this is my work and blah, blah, but can you ever just answer a question, please? Like have an opinion about something? Maybe there are therapists who are frustratingly just dodging, and maybe they don't have any idea. I'm overly opinionated. I have opinions on everything. Like almost anything a client asks me, I have a bunch of stuff that I think about it. That's not necessarily a good thing. That doesn't mean I'm helping. That just means I like what I think about stuff, and I think about stuff a lot. And so I have stuff to say. That does not necessarily contribute. But I have answers. When people ask me, I have things that I think. And I have things where I think I would probably, if I were in your place, I think it would be better to go this direction or that direction. But an honest therapist who's doing a good job often does not answer those questions, because we know that so much of life is so complex and unpredictable that there isn't a good answer, that it really depends on how you approach it. And it really depends on how you inhabit that thing. And I'll give you some examples so that that makes more sense. It's not just some abstract thought. Years ago, I wrote an essay about how when people are seeking to build self-esteem, it's only evidence that they have a poor self-esteem, that it doesn't help. Affirmations don't help. Building self-esteem doesn't help, because all you're doing is going, well, I believe there's something wrong with me. And when I'm building self-esteem, I'm attempting to build some external measure by which I can prove that I'm not a bad person, which only shows that I think I'm a bad person. Right? The self-esteem is this inevitable thing that I have a right to be here. I don't need to justify it. And in that article, I used the example of one person could be a professional golfer just crushing it. And if they're doing it seeking this external validation because deeply inside themselves, they don't like themselves and they're not happy with themselves and they don't feel comfortable in life and they don't appreciate their own presence, that person could literally win millions of dollars as a professional golfer, and they could sadly choose to end their own life. They could suffer depression and suicidal ideation. And everyone could go, but my God, like, isn't that the dream, that you have this thing you're so good at and you succeeded at it? No, no, that does not make people happy. Liking yourself and doing stuff out of a sense of joy is what makes life meaningful and purposeful. So someone can have things that line up and they can be absolutely miserable. And then the next person could be someone who has this deeply meditative, they just like themselves and they like the silence that's in them and they like how that translates into their ability to use their body. And it just so happens that the game of golf happens to align with that deeply. So they got into it and they realized that in this game of golf, they can continue to experience themselves in this calmness and this quietness and this appreciation for being alive. And so the game of golf becomes this vehicle by which they experience themselves and they experience joy and appreciation for their presence on the earth. And so they play golf their entire life and maybe they succeed and maybe they win millions of dollars on tours, but they know that it's not about the millions of dollars. They know that this game is an expression of their joy of being alive and being present and their appreciation for themselves as a living conscious being. And that person, that career is beautiful. So the point is, coming back to the point of why a therapist often will dodge a question of like, what's the right thing for me, is because a therapist doesn't know how you're doing it. Let's say you had a client who came in and is like, I'm highly talented at golf and my parents set me up and I've trained and it's pretty likely that I could have a successful career and make a living being a professional golfer. And I'm really struggling with this. And like, what do you think? Should I invest my time and energy and become a professional golfer and take a shot at this? How is the therapist going to know which person you are? How does the therapist know? It depends on you and how you engage that thing. The therapist doesn't know whether that's good for you or whether you're engaging it from a deep sense of alignment with your own self and your pleasure in being alive, and that the vehicle of golf is the best way for you to express that. They don't know that. We're very good at helping people explore it and find out, but when we dodge that question, we're not doing it to just be infuriating or because we don't have an idea or a thought about it. That we're just playing some game by which we've learned, never answer a client's question, make them answer it. They need to work it out. No, we're not playing some game. It's because there isn't a good answer for that. I can give you more examples from my own experience. I'm one of those people who has always had a sort of quick and a nimble mind, and I take in information easily. I'm good at academics. I was good at being a teacher. I was exposed to market research because my father was in it, really good at talking through that, thinking like I can talk about that in a way that somebody would think that I really know stuff about it and there's a talent. Not for me. I don't want to spend my life doing that. So if I were to be deeply confused and if my father had imposed the expectation on me that you're of no value unless you go into market research and blah, 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 and I went to a therapist and said, hey, I'm pretty good at this and I've written articles that got published and should I pursue this? How are they going to know? And no, it was not the right thing for me. Maybe I could have adjusted to it, but I'm the kind of person that I needed to do something that was in deep alignment with how I was born and who I was and the way my mind and my way of being has been. And until I loved and appreciated that, I was not going to find the vehicle for it. Right? And so you in these big questions, you can't look at external indicators and go, oh, well, that sounds like a great career like that. I bet you there's a lot of success and there's a high demand for that, and you can make good money, and you're going to be able to get married and have kids if that's what you like, blah blah blah. Those things don't work as a metric for whether you should or should not do something. And I have these conversations with clients all the time who struggle and agonize with, like, should I or should I not with these big life decisions. Nobody can tell you whether you should or should not, because how you bring yourself to it is what makes the difference. Let's go one level of complexity higher. There was another case. So I've shared with you guys before, I got into music fairly young. I taught myself guitar, then I took guitar lessons, but I had a real propensity for it, a real talent for it, and learned pretty quickly. And anybody who knew me was like, oh, you're such a musician, et cetera, et cetera. And it never lined up. So I won't go into that. I've talked about that before, but to be a professional musician wasn't in alignment with me. To be a musician, yes, it's a big part of who I am, but to be a professional musician was not in alignment with me in so many ways that it was just nothing. I was never going to let it happen, no matter how much I pretended. And when I graduated from undergrad, I had essentially exited and decided I'm done with this. I don't want to keep doing this. It's not working. I don't think it's going to work. I don't see this working. But I was so confused. Like, I was a little bit older, and now I had gone through undergrad, and I had an English major with an emphasis on writing, and it's like, but what am I going to do? Like, it was intensely confusing and existentially threatening. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I loved traveling, and I loved language, and I loved the idea of learning language. It's something I was obsessed with, and I'm still low key sort of obsessed with it. And I was obsessed with Ethiopia and Ethiopian culture and with the Amharic language. To this day, it is literally my favorite language on the face of the planet. I love, love, love the sound of the Amharic language. On Spotify, look up Amharic, and you will find channels where someone is, for example, reading the Amharic Bible. It is such a beautiful language, but I digress. Like, you should do it though. It's such a beautiful, interesting language. I really, really love it. So I was obsessed with Ethiopian culture, and I desperately wanted to learn Amharic. I wanted to speak this language. I didn't care if it was common. I didn't care if it was something I was ever going to use in business. Like, I wanted that the way I had wanted to be able to play guitar. And it's like Peace Corps. And I had friends who had gone to Peace Corps, and all of a sudden I was lit up like you cannot imagine. I was lit up. I was obsessed. I had not been obsessed. I was finishing off school, going on job interviews, and I would literally sprint home on lunch there's tons of paperwork for the Peace Corps, to fill out paperwork and race to the office and turn it in by hand. Like, I made this process happen faster maybe than anybody has ever made it happen. I was obsessed. I would literally sprint so that I was like heaving, breathing hard to race and finish paperwork and jump on my car and et cetera, et cetera. I was just, this was the next thing. This is what I was going to do. I was going to spend 2 years. I was going to extend it to 4 if they let me. And I was going to be fluent in Amharic, and I was going to absorb more of this culture and learn this country and learn the history. It was just a thing for me. It kind of still is, right? But I'm older and I have a career and kids, so I can't invest the time. But you go to the Peace Corps, they don't just let you, as the recruiter said, it's not Club Med. Like, we assign you. So they assigned me Russia, and I was like, I don't want to go to Russia. And they assigned me to Namibia. And I went in person, and I told the guy, I was like, look, I know I'm not supposed to be able to choose, but I'm obsessed with Ethiopia. I've already been studying the language. I've been there before. I get that you're not, but it's not like I'm not asking to go to Hawaii, or like, I'm not doing this. Like, there's a need there, but I know it's not fair, it's probably offensive, but if I'm just like honest with you, like between you and I, like off the record, I'm not gonna go if you guys don't send me to Ethiopia. I think he appreciated the honesty, even though that's pretty offensive. Like going into the Peace Corps and going like, "Send me where I want to go, or else I'm not doing it." Because he was like, if we don't pick you and assign you, you go to the bottom of the pile, and then you got to wait. And I was like, I understand. Like you got to do what you got to do, but I'm telling you right now, I want to go to Ethiopia. And so imagine my excitement when evidently the guy pulled some strings and just low key was like, you know what, we're going to let this guy go to Ethiopia. And they assigned me to Ethiopia. And it was going to be like 6 months. You do some paperwork, you do some meds, you get some shots, and then they start you on the language, and then they bring you in country, and you have 3 months of intensive language immersion. And then they send you to your location, and you're teaching or you're doing whatever it is that you're going to do. And so I was in. And then Eritrea and Ethiopia, the north of Ethiopia, in Eritrea, there were shots fired, and it ended up escalating into full-blown war that went for a couple of years, I think, if I remember correctly. And they notified me, the Peace Corps is pulled out, and we will not be sending anyone in. It's not safe, and the federal government is not interested, or whatever the agency is. I'm going to say this to you. I think this is true. I think that was the greatest disappointment of my entire life. Not succeeding in music. I did not experience the bitterness of the frustration. There was a lot of confusion of like, what am I going to do? Like this was what I meant to do, and it's not working. And I don't know what to do. I don't have any direction. I don't have any experience. I haven't built anything. So there was tons of confusion and existential dread and like fear of like, I don't know what to do. Like I don't like to, there's a lot of things I don't like doing, and I loved music, and if that's not going to work for me, I don't know what to do. And then the Peace Corps was the answer. But I can tell you right now, I feel like mildly choked up telling you about it, like thinking back on it, because it was absolutely the greatest disappointment of my entire life. There is no relationship that ended. There is no job opportunity that didn't work out, that resulted in the bitterness and the absolute confusion. I literally felt like God had said yes and then slapped me down and said, haha, psych. I was so depressed. And I fought through misery and aimlessness following that. And I still knew that I wanted to, it was after that, I think, or maybe I was already in therapy, but I was in therapy. Thank goodness I had support or whatever. And it was after that, I was like, I want to travel. I still want to travel. So I did end up signing up to teach with a private company, and I ended up teaching in Saudi Arabia, and there was a really interesting experience, and ended up traveling to Nepal and Thailand and seeing the world, and it was a great experience, and coming back and learning some things. But overall, was really one of the most difficult times in my life, psychologically, emotionally, existentially. I was misery. I was empty of all purpose. I had no idea how I was going to get through life because there was nothing that I wanted to do. And I'm one of those people where the doing of things that are meaningless is dangerous. Some people can do it. They can do it. I have conversations with my brother. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't get, like, I can just do whatever I need to do to pay the bills, and I'm happy to do that. And that's lovely. That's wonderful. That's adaptive. I'm one of those people. It's like, I need the sense of purpose. If I don't have it, it slowly wears me down and drives me into deep depressions, and it's not good. Life is miserable if I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing and if I'm not in love with it. Okay, so what's the point? How does this relate to this decision making? This is how complex things are. You could say, oh my God, a terrible disappointment. This thing that you were deeply aligned with didn't happen. Do you know that's true? Do I know that's true? Does a therapist know that's true? No, you don't know that's true. I could have gone and had a horrible experience and learned that this was empty. Anything could happen. I could have gone and maybe been kidnapped by terrorists and tortured to death. You don't know what a thing is. You will never know what a thing is. Life is a state of never actually knowing how something would have worked out. You don't know. This is an American sickness. We have become so obsessed with the idea of responsibility and control, and you can make this happen. You can do this, like you got this. That's great. That's great. But in the end, it's asinine if you actually think it's true. It's great to use it for motivation. It's great to plan your life. It's great. But if you actually think that you know what the outcomes are and how things are going to work out, you are sadly mistaken. I do not have any idea what would have happened if I had gone in the Peace Corps. Could have been the most amazing thing, could have been mediocre, could have been horrible. Like, nobody knows. Nobody knows if there is actually a purpose for you in life. Nobody knows what the right decision is. And everyone's always looking for the right decision, and they're always looking for someone to sell them, oh man, like you got it, you nailed it. Like, that sounds like the thing. That really sounds like the thing. Okay, great. If that feels good and you go do that, and placebo effect, you have a great experience, great. But you know what the truth is? Working the placebo effect and bringing a super open, curious, joyful attitude and just pleasure at being alive yourself to everything and anything that comes to you, so such that like anything that comes to you, it ends up being this amazing experience for you, because that's how you approach it. That's the only control you have. If you're trying to externally evaluate whether this is the best thing for you, now this sounds like it runs a little counter to what my previous podcast, where I talked about purpose and alignment, deep alignment with who you truly are. It's not counter to that conversation, that there is a way that you are that's very consistent and very profound and is unavoidable for you. And it is a beautiful thing, and it is a thing that can belong in the world and be in the world. And there are ways in which that brings great value. The fact that you're here brings great value to the human community and to the earth. That's true. And how you leverage that is, once you accept your presence on the face of this planet and you allow that to be true, and you learn to know yourself with joy and to be in a state of joy that you exist on the face of the planet, that you don't need anything more than that. You don't need justification. You don't need someone to explain it to you. You're not asking someone to tell you what to do with it. You first know your presence as a loved thing. You love it, not somebody else, that you love it. You love the fact that you are conscious and present, and you love the way this body and this brain and this personality just has expresses ever since it's been born, for whatever reason. When you start with that, you're going to gravitate to external choices that become really elegant vehicles for you to express that, right? So someone could come and say, well, John, didn't you figure that out? Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I waited almost half a century to finally really, really get to know who I am, and to stop shaming myself and stop allowing other people to shame me for the way I think. Like, I've told stories about like how philosophical I've always been, and how sort of like out there, and everything's abstract and philosophical and intellectual and blah, blah. And like my own father, who's the same way, who used to warn me about navel gazing. You're a navel gazer, and it's like, you need to do something, and blah, blah, blah. I had an advisor, my own advisor in college, and I think I've shared this before. No offense, Sharon. I doesn't hurt me, but it's just a really good object lesson of how people get confused about who someone is, and they can misdirect, right? You didn't do anything wrong. I'm fine. But it's a good example. I asked her for a letter of recommendation, and in the letter of recommendation, she literally said, she said some nice things, but also said that John lacks focus and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you can't use that letter of recommendation. But what she saw, she didn't understand. I didn't either. No offense. I didn't understand either. That literally was the best thing about me, was this ability to see massive amounts of information and for it to all float in my head in this confused, and for me to compulsively think through it until it coalesces and I go, oh, this whole thing works together in this way. And there's this simple answer that coalesces and congeals out of that. And that simple answer is a beautiful thing that does not contradict the complexity. And this is usable, right? That's a skill that I've had since I was a little child that I was shamed for, right? So it took all of that time for me to stop shaming myself and accept that. And guess what? Being a therapist is a vehicle that allows me to be that person. And I get rewarded, and people express, thanks and gratitude. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful marriage, right? So there again is a situation where, take being a therapist. You can't evaluate that from external, right, check mark lists and know whether that's right for you or not. Because there are a lot of people, and then I would have been one of these people before I understood myself and before I got comfortable with myself. We're like, how can you do it? Like, how could anybody want to sit there and listen to people like, some of them are just whining and they're just stuck in negativity, and you have to sit there and listen to it. And then other people are just genuinely telling like horribly painful stories and crying, and yeah, all of that happens. Why am I joyful that this is my career, that I love it? I feel thankful. Oh my God, like, because I get to be who I am in this. And because I'm okay with that. Yeah, sometimes it's sad. And on rare occasion, I'll feel a little depressed and overwhelmed. But mostly I'm just so thankful that I'm doing something that allows me to be who I am. So you couldn't do a check box and go, oh, does it sound good that you're going to listen to people complain about stuff? Does it sound good that everyone who comes in is going to be really conflicted? Does it sound good when you do couples work? People are going to come in and fight in front of you and be mean to one. Like, no, you can't evaluate it that way. Does the vehicle of that thing allow you to express a deep purpose? Does the vehicle of that thing allow you to express a deep purpose? Okay, so I got a little far afield because I ended up talking about that sense of purpose again. But this podcast was about boiling all of this whole thing down, the complexity of how to ask someone, like, can you help me make this decision? Like, how does this work? And there's all the complexity of like, well, who are you? Do you accept yourself? Do you love yourself? Do you understand what you have to offer? Can you find a vehicle that allows you to best express who you are and what you have to offer? Can you do that? All of that complexity. So the therapist can't help you. They can't answer the question because they don't know how you're approaching it. Maybe you're doing it in a way that is a self-violation. Even though it sounds like a great career, you're going to end up being depressed. Or maybe you're doing it in a way that aligns with you, but nobody really realized that's who you are. For example, in my case, everyone thought he's a musician, but the truth is I'm much, much, much more of a therapist than I ever was a musician. All of that's true. So there is one way. There is a simple algorithm that you can use where you don't have to cook. Have I accepted myself? Do I know myself? I didn't figure it out for 45 freaking years. So no judgment from me if you don't know and you don't figure it out in the next month or whatever, right? And you don't want to be like, oh, I have to have all these life experiences and go teach English in Saudi Arabia and get rejected for the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, like whatever. Like, you can't plan that path. That shit just happened and it worked for me, great, but you can't plan that path. So what is this algorithm, this way of being able to move forward, even if you haven't cooked your deep purpose? And you can discuss this with a therapist or with a friend or with yourself or whatever. It's a way to think about all of this complexity, to go, well, how do I make decisions now if I haven't cooked all this stuff? I love this one. I discovered this one. I'm going to get to it, but I'm going to tell you one more story. Early on, I really love working with teens and young adults. I love it. It's like one of my favorite. It's a sweet spot for me. It's one of my favorite things. I had quite a few teens early on, and I had a teen who had a very, very, very difficult life, emotionally, psychologically brutal. And so we weren't really working on therapy per se. A lot of it was just like having a safe place to come, and someone who has parents who are that lacking doesn't know it. They're struggling to grow up. The problem is they don't know how anything works. No one accurately explains. In fact, their parents are teaching them things that are directly opposite to what's healthy and good. And they're so confused, and they can see that other people are doing well, and they can tell that there's something with them where they don't get stuff right and nothing works out. And then they know that they shouldn't just get negative, and that's not like, and so you get young people like super, 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 super confused. And I wanted to offer this person something like, how does this person? And I started by conceptualizing it as this: when this person would come in and say, do you think I should do this, or should I go on this job interview, or blah, 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 is go, you know what, don't make it too complicated. There's lots of anxiety, there's trauma responses, there's always negative people in any given situation, blah, blah, blah. Like, you're not gonna, it's too complicated. There's too much trauma, you're not gonna be able to look at this and figure out the right thing. Just ask yourself this binary question: if I make this choice, does it tend to be a choice that opens up opportunities and widens the number of possibilities I have in life? Or does it tend to narrow it and bottleneck it? So that once I do this, it's bottlenecked and I have fewer opportunities and I'm a little bit more trapped. And one thing that you know behind the scenes is, inextricably, the thing that bottlenecks is always a decision made out of fear and seeking safety, which is not a bad thing if you know what it is. That's fine. I narrowed my life down to the tiniest little thing for like 6 or 7 years when I first went to therapy, where nothing was going on. People were looking at me going like, you're screwed. Like, what are you going to do? Just sit in your apartment? I had some sense of what I was doing, but right. So it's okay if you know that that you're doing that, but when you make those decisions that reduce possibilities for you, they're being done out of fear and out of self-protection, which, again, if that's what you're choosing to do, that's fine. But it's going to limit your options and your life's going to get smaller. If you're making a choice, maybe it feels scary, maybe you have trauma responses, but if you're making a choice that opens you down the road to much more choices and more opportunities to engage with yourself and with the human race, that choice is made out of healthy, thriving, and an instinct that you may be trustworthy to live your life and to expand your life and to build and to grow. That somewhere inside yourself, no matter how scared you are, you're maybe betting on the possibility that you can handle challenges and that you can build and you can achieve things, and you can build a foundation from which your life can get bigger and stronger and happier and more joyful and more curious. So I wasn't that verbose with a teen, but essentially I offered that model, and it worked really well for that person. It became sort of the model, the metric by which we navigated this incredibly confusing life. And when you're a young person, life is incredibly confusing already, but if you have a really dysfunctional parents, it gets 1,000 times worse. And so this really, really helped. And I've heard in therapy groups and in from other clinicians these two new words. So I'm going to reframe what I just described to you to finally just cook it down to the point of this whole podcast. Which you can see, I love all of the stories and complexity, but in the end, it cooks down to something, right? I heard the word expansion and contraction, which I really like because it takes the judgment out. Contraction, if that's what you're doing, that's fine. You're in a state of contraction. That's fine. Expansion, great. Not better than the other, but they're two different things with qualitative differences and qualitatively different kinds of choices. And you should have different expectations. So how does this relate to these very complex decisions that you want to make? Let's say this is a super complex decision. Let's say you're in love with someone, you're thinking about asking them to marry you, and they want kids and you're not sure that you do. So you come to your therapist and you're like, what do I do? Like, what's my move here? What's my decision? You have a mixture of things. Do I want to marry this person? Should I marry someone when I feel unsure of this really important question? Like, it's complicated. It's really complicated. When you think about marrying this person, are you doing it with this noise in the back of your head of like, well, but I have to get married sooner or later, and I'm afraid if I don't do it now, it's like this person might be my person, and it's like, well, I'm getting a little bit older. I like, what if I don't meet somebody else? And am I going to be one of those people who's old and doesn't have kids? Like, I don't know. Like, I think I might want to have kids because I don't want to be able. Do you hear the language? It's all fear-based. It's all contractive. It's not about the external decision. It's about how you engage it. It's not about whether you're a professional golfer or not. It is about how you're inhabiting that. So what I'm modeling for you is that person is inhabiting that decision and thinking about making that decision from a contractive place. They're worried about losing out on something, right? It's YOLO, it's FOMO. They're not making the decision because it's an expansive decision of like, you know what? I'm really scared. I'm afraid of having kids, but I think that if I choose to marry this person, they seem really good for me and they push my boundaries in healthy ways. They push me to become stronger and more loving, and their family are people that I really want to get to know. They're not people that I want to avoid. And when I think about having kids, I really do want to do it. I feel a lot of fear, but that it's just going to expand things for me, and it's going to push me to be a better person and to be a good parent. And when I look at this, it's just like life is opening up. It becomes this vehicle by which life opens up for me. That's expansive. Now, here's where you have to be careful. Don't get caught up in qualitatively should be expansive or you should be contractive. It's not, even in that, it's not about making the right decision about whether it should be expansive or contractive. It is about knowing and being aware that that's what you're doing and deciding that's the good thing for you to do. I shared with you that following the Peace Corps debacle not happening and me ending my professional career as a musician and feeling how lost I was, my life became so small. My life became so small. Anyone looking from the outside would have been like, dude, someone with your talents and intelligence and who has backup, like my parents would help me go to school if I wanted to go to school again. But like, what in the fuck are you doing? Like, you've done nothing. And I kind of low key had done nothing of any significance that had added up to anything. I made a choice that was contractive in the amount of activities that I did, but I was going to a very good therapist and I was doing an enormous amount of work about what in the hell is going on here? What's going on with me? What happened to me? What did I learn? Who are my parents? Who are my family? I was riffing through and working through an enormous amount of content that had bottlenecked me, and I was not going to be able to expand my life. So I accepted a very contracted life, and I laid down it and I let it happen. I would go to therapy, I would come home, pet my cat, I would go to the beach, swing on the traveling rings, go for a run, barely talk to anybody, barely had any friends, like literally almost maybe socialized once or twice a year. It was extremely contractive, but there was something deep in me that knew that I needed that in order to, when I decided to do something expansive, to not do it in the wrong way, in the old way, which I'd always done with perfectionism, with my dad's voice in my head. You're never going to figure it out. You don't know what you're talking about. Like all of those negative messages I had received, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where every time I engaged something to build something, I did it in this horribly brittle, limited way that was never going to allow me to succeed. So I chose something contractive, and that was healthy for me because it was going to allow me to move into an extremely expansive phase, which I'm now in, which continues to expand, where I chose to get married and I chose to have children. And all of those have been incredibly expansive. All of those have opened me up to more people and more life and more joy and more curiosity. And I started a career as a therapist, all of that expansive, because that's the phase that I'm in. And knowing it and choosing it, right? And so let's come back to the concrete. As complex as life can be, and there isn't anyone who can tell you the right thing to do for you, unless you're literally like, I'm thinking about killing my neighbor. Is that right or wrong? Okay, yeah. Don't do it. It's wrong. Don't do it. I'm thinking, I get so angry that I feel like keying my boyfriend's car. No, that's wrong. Don't do it. Someone can tell you, don't do that. But most of these decisions that people agonize over, there isn't a right answer, because how you inhabit it, and you consciously choosing the phase that you're in so that you can meet life as who you are and honoring who you are, is what makes it right or wrong. And the way, and if you're not there yet, if you haven't sorted it all out, the way to really figure that out is to ask yourself, is this decision expansive or contractive? And if it is one or the other, if I can tell when I think it through, if I hear myself speaking the language of fear and the language of avoidance, well, I think this is the right thing to do because I don't want that. That's contractive. Am I consciously in a contractive phase? When I was in my contractive phase, I chose a job that was literally not going to go anywhere. I worked a job for 6 years where I learned skills and I met people, but there was literally nowhere to go. It was just very low stress. It was interesting enough to keep me up and running. It paid well enough that I could pay my rent and pay for therapy, and it allowed me to do what I was doing. So it's okay. It was a job that was about avoidance, right? I was avoiding getting embroiled in a job that just consumes me and did not allow me to do the work that I needed to do. So it was a contractive phase, but consciously choose it. So you ask the question, is it contractive or is it expansive? If you're pretending something is expansive, if you're like, I want to be expansive, this is the direction I'm going, and you hear yourself evaluating your decision with a contractive language where there's really avoidance under it, it's really fear-based, it's really protective, it's self-protective, either own the fact that you're choosing something contractive, or go, no, this decision I'm evaluating, this thing I'm evaluating is actually a contractive choice. What's the thing that makes me scared but opens my life up to more exposure to more people, better people, people that maybe I feel threatened by because they're so intelligent and they're so successful, and that seems frightening, but it's going to expose me to a world in which I'm going to be pushed and motivated to work harder and to develop myself and to become more resilient and to expand out into the world and to take a bigger role and a bigger place in the world. If you choose to be expansive and you hear that language inside your head or in a discussion, and you're like, yes, that's what I choose right now, then you know that that's the right decision. So here we come to the end. Your therapist and other people can't tell you whether something's right or wrong. And someone who tells you, I know you, this is wrong for you, you got to be so careful with those people, because that's about their ego and their desire to prove how insightful they are. That is not safe. I'm not going to, that's a different podcast. I'm not going to go into it, but that is not safe. The kind of people who are like, oh man, I know you so well. Like, this is so not right for you. Mothers have a problem with this. I know my daughter, this guy is not right for her, but mind your business. You don't know why that person is doing that, why the person has chosen that person. You don't know what they're learning. Even if it's nothing but 5 years of a negative experience, your daughter needed that negative experience. Your daughter took that on in order to learn something, and you're trying to get in the way. Let me not go down into the rabbit hole, right? No one can tell you. Don't trust people who are like, I know you. Like, that's not right for you. I know you. That's going to be really good for you. Trust people who explore it with you and go, well, what is it like? Like, tell me why you would do it. Like, how are you thinking about it? How do you feel about it? How does your body respond to it? And then apply that metric. Am I employing the language that this sounds expansive, or am I employing language that sounds contractive? Am I pretending it's expansive, saying, well, I really want this and I really want that, but deep inside, the truth is you want that to succeed so you can make enough money to not have to do it anymore? That's contractive. You're really trying to be self-protective. That's okay. Just admit it. Just admit that that's what you're doing. You're being contractive because you need to contract in this phase of life, because there's some resetting, there's some relearning, there's some reprogramming that's going on. That's okay, but know it for what it is. Talk it through with someone who's open, who allows you to sink down deeply into yourself. If you don't have true alignment, if you don't know your true alignment yet, your deepest self, that's okay. Just use that metric. Is it expansive or is it contractive? If it appears to be expansive, am I consciously saying, yes, I think that's the best thing for me in life right now? Let's move in that direction. If it appears to be contractive, is there a healthy reason for me to do this right now? Do I really need to protect myself? Is this a time where I'm doing some deep, vulnerable work in which I'm evolving, and I don't want the world pouring on and trying to direct me in a certain way? I need the space to get in touch with who I am and what this next move is. Great. Contractive is healthy. So I think I've come to the end of this podcast. Ended up being an hour. I thought it might be short. It wasn't. And stuff with me rarely is. What are you going to do? But I wish you guys a happy new year. And I really wanted to leave that with you. I think it's just a really elegant way to move through how confusing life can be and how complex it can be, especially if you haven't figured out exactly who you are, or you haven't accepted who you are yet. You don't know your deep purpose. Just talk through with someone who's pretty neutral, who spends more time exploring it with you, how you feel about it, how you talk about it, how you think about it, and just evaluate, is this expansive? Is this choice expansive, or is this choice contractive? And if it is expansive, am I consciously choosing that? And if it is contractive, am I consciously choosing that? I want to leave that with you guys. I wish you a happy new year, and I will see you next time. God bless.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.